Oh, hello there. Now I'd say it's time to finally do a review of D4. It has been more than a year since launch, and I did say that I would do a review after some time has passed after the release, since I thought that if I reviewed it on day one, it would mean nothing given Blizzard's reputation for dramatically changing their games down the line. And apparently, I was not wrong. D4 on launch day and D4 now are two very different games. So during this review, I will take you back to the way D4 was for a bit and see what was good or bad there, and then we'll move on to the present state of the game. Before we go any further, I also want to add that I do play and enjoy the game for what it is. I always have fun, sometimes less, sometimes more. But it has a lot of issues that I feel need to be mentioned and discussed, especially if I want to be honest about how I feel and what I think about the game and the developers. So let's journey back to the launch day. Basically, when the game first launched, it received some mixed reviews with a lot of criticism in certain areas. One of the major problems was the fact that some aspects of the game simply didn't work, like resistances, for example. So you would just stack as much armor as you could, and this basically meant that sorcerers were extremely squishy then. Another issue was that Uber Uniques, or as they are now known, Mythic Uniques, were nowhere to be seen. The developers said that this idea came from D2 and that they were surprised that it wasn't popular in D4. Now, the major difference between these two games is that D2 wasn't a game as a service and didn't feature seasons, so no matter how rare, you would eventually get the item you were chasing after, and if not, you could always trade for it, which is also not a feature that's available in D4. So basically the problem here is that D4 has seasons which last for about 3 months, and there is pretty much 1 in a million drop chance to get a mythic item. So basically, in order to get a single drop during a season, you would have to grind for around 10 hours a day, every day, for 10 to 13 years, during a 3-month season. I honestly don't understand how this seemed like a logical idea to anyone on the team. I mean, having mythics be very rare is all well and good, but we need to be realistic about the time span required to actually get them. Then there were server problems, of course, luckily not as bad as with Diablo IV, at least not on my end. And that always gets me to the question, why doesn't this game have an offline mode? Now, if there is one thing that 11th Hour Games did absolutely right, it was providing us with an offline mode. Now, I know that offline is not really popular with ARPG players today, since we all want to play with our friends, trade, and do other multiplayer activities together. And this is all very valid. But I still remember when Last Epoch launched, they had a lot of server problems and they simply played offline until the servers stabilized. When Diablo III launched, I had to wait for a week until I could play instead of being able to simply go offline and have fun. And these were my college days, so it wasn't that big of a deal as it is now for me. I personally have never liked the fact that some games require you to be online in order to play them, and there are many reasons as to why. And this is something that I hope to make a separate video on in the future, as there are many arguments to be made there. Now, what I did like on launch day of Diablo were the visuals. Everything in the game looked very detailed and well designed. The characters look realistic and there is a feeling of a dark fantasy setting in the world. Then we have the skill feel. This is a very important aspect of any game. Do the skills feel unique, and when you play, do you feel like the skills connect when you strike an enemy? Both from a visual and sound design perspective, this was extremely well done. In these respects, the game feels like it was made by the old Blizzard. When it comes to design choices, Diablo IV feels like a split personality to me. It is an ARPG, but it's also an MMO light, meaning there's a shared open world where players can interact and do activities together even if they're not in a party. So how do you balance such a game? Well, we have the Sorcerer, who until recently was only good at clearing trash mobs, unless you had some kind of a broken build. If you made a Chain Lightning build, even now you could clear Pit 100, spending 2 minutes on filling the bar and the rest of your time on fighting the boss for what feels like an eternity. It feels like the Sorcerer was designed to function as part of a group instead of being able to clear all content by playing solo. For somebody like me, this was a big problem, as I am a huge magic caster enjoyer, and I have exactly one friend that plays Diablo IV, and that's it. And he's not all that into the game. And generally speaking, I prefer to play solo or with friends, and tend to avoid playing with random people quite a lot, so I'm talking from that perspective. If you enjoy grouping with random people, more power to you. Like most of good ARPGs, Diablo IV also has something that it does better than its rivals, and that is the gameplay feel. Skills feel crisp and responsive, the visual effects are superb, and when you have a build that can do all content and also fits into your fantasy, you can have a lot of fun. Which is something I will elaborate on in my Last Epoch review video. Then we had another really popular problem, which seems to be plaguing this IP since its inception, which is limited stash space. And this is a problem that is apparently here to stay. Now, I'm not a game developer and I have limited experience when it comes to coding, but I can only say that if I can have an unlimited number of stash tabs in Path of Exile, 255 stash tabs in Last Epoch, how come this is a technology that the biggest studio of them all still does not have? This was a huge problem in the beginning especially. We had only 4 stash tabs to keep all our rare, legendary, ancestral legendary, unique items, gems, potions, keys, legendary aspects, cats and dogs, socks, and everything else. A truly staggering variety of different items we needed, yet had no place to keep them in. Thankfully, the problem has been alleviated since then. Now we have 6 stash tabs, sacred items are completely removed, and we have separate storage for gem dust. Aspects are no longer one-use items and are placed in the Codex of Power, meaning that they are always available after you salvage an item with the aspect you need. Keys have their own stash, and you don't need to have that many of them so that they keep eating away at your stash space. It's still not enough though, especially if you, like me, like to level alts and create builds for most, if not all, classes. Then we'd need at least double the amount of stash tabs, and even then it's kind of a question mark. Creating different builds is one of the cornerstones of a good and fun ARPG, and is something players really enjoy doing. So if you have a Lightning Spear Sorcerer but wanna switch to a Fireball or Hydra Sorcerer or whatever else, you need more room in your stash for all that extra gear. Which brings me to the armory. This should have been present from the start. Simple as that. It was such a cool and useful feature in Diablo 3 that it astounds me that we still don't have it in D4, although from what I gather it has been announced for the next season. The ability to switch your own build with one click, who doesn't see the value in that? It's a massive quality of life improvement. It's also the main reason why I only make one build per class every season, since it would be a pain to keep respecking every time I wanted to create something else. And I feel that most of you watching would probably agree with this. The next item I want to talk about are the cosmetics. The bane of most modern games, the horse armors, the character armors, the skill VFX, the footprints, portraits, wings, capes, and so many more throughout many video games. While these can look great and are definitely selling well considering that a lot of games have them, should they really have a place in a game that already costs between $70 and $100? Not to mention that we also pay for each expansion as well. I would say no. They shouldn't be there, but as long as they don't affect gameplay, I can tolerate them. At least the cosmetics within the core game also look decent to good. This is again an interesting thing to compare against games like Path of Exile and Last Epoch. Path of Exile is free to play for all intents and purposes. No MTX affects gameplay. However, I would still say that you do need at least one premium stash tab, one currency tab, and one map tab for optimal experience, since you get so many currency items and so many maps that it would be a logistical nightmare to sort through all of them without those tabs. So if you really like the game and plan on playing it long term, you're probably going to spend between around 10 to 20 bucks for the tabs. So it's still a fair price considering the amount of content Path of Exile has to offer and how few, if any, bugs occur in the game. You pay a lot less and get a lot more for your money. Last Epoch is still in its early days, and I know that they are planning to do the transmog system as well, which would be great. But as it stands right now, you do have to pay $34 for the base game, which is a good price in my opinion. You get 255 stash tabs that you unlock with in-game gold, which is earned by simply playing the game, or simply trading with other people. So in the case of both Path of Exile and Last Epoch, the cosmetics are purely optional and the games are both very fairly priced. And if there is one positive thing I can say about Diablo 4's cosmetics, it's that those that are already in the base game look and feel a lot better than those in Last Epoch and Path of Exile. And there's one more thing I wanted to add. While editing this video, I realized that I forgot to mention that for the Spiritborn, the cosmetics you earned from previous season passes are apparently unavailable, which is really weird to me, because why the hell not? And this once again goes to my criticism towards the developers or the people in position to make decisions and allocate resources, because this comes off as either an accidental oversight or it's just a consequence of laziness. So to sum it up, the cosmetic items in Diablo 4 are way overpriced, especially for an already more than fully priced game. When we take into account the bugs, the broken builds, items lacking an icon and instead simply displaying placeholder icons, which indicates oversight and lack of polish, lack of build variety for certain classes, Sorcerer especially, as it's the one I have most experience with, this all makes it really feel like the cosmetics should either not be present in the game or that they should be a lot cheaper, considering that we are already paying for the base game and the subsequent expansions. Because in my opinion, if you are going to put in cosmetics for purchase, they're a form of the players saying thank you to the developers for giving me this wonderful experience in this great game. And unfortunately, this is still not the case with Diablo 4. Even though, as I have said, I do have fun in it, but I do not think that the developers are paying enough attention when it comes to the quality of their patches and updates. And now let's go over some of the most memorable bugs, which for me were during the Season of Blood, with the Blurred Beast glyph double dipping and enabling the druid to have huge DPS potential, and the Ball Lightning Sorcerer. Again, in a PvE game, these kinds of bugs are not a big deal for me personally, but it does feel like they cheapen the experience, because I like to get the proper gear and allocate my Paragon points in such a way that I get to this obscene power level, but not as a result of some developer's mistake. And this seems to be a trend with Diablo 4, where with every season there comes one or two bugs that completely break the game. And this is still going towards my criticism of how the developers are managing that game. A single zero created a godly build capable of erasing everything from existence, which was fun to mess around with, but ultimately, and this is just my impression, felt boring in the end. You'd summon as many balls as you could, teleport, erase everything, repeat. Well, this is the point of games like Diablo. It was meant to be achieved, as I said, through getting good gear, spending Paragon points, using the mechanics of the game to achieve great power, not some developer forgetting how many digits there are in the number 100. Don't get me wrong, I realize that mistakes can happen to everyone and anyone, but I do feel that the game should have gone through way more testing before releasing a patch. Then we had problems with resistances not working on launch day or even a full season into the game's existence, which to me feels like it should have been priced as an early access title instead of a AAA game. I'm listing this as a bug since I honestly don't know how it came to be that a Diablo game would be released with a problem of that magnitude. Maybe it was due to the fact that the dev teams were being switched mid-development or something else. Since I don't know, I'll call it a bug that took a while to resolve properly and move on. Gold duping has been a thing for several seasons now, and it's a bug that just keeps coming back. While it doesn't affect me personally, as I don't trade in D4, except when playing with my friend, and even then we just give each other items that we could use, but don't have, I can see how detrimental it can be to the community that actually does trade. Currently, when you go to craft an elixir, a potion, a rune, or a mythic unique, you can't see really anything about the requirements other than the ingredient icons, and in order to see what ingredients you precisely need, you need to right-click on the item you want to craft, and then a separate window will open which will then tell you what you actually need, which strikes me as a really strange design choice, and it feels like something that was an afterthought after they had finished already creating a vessel of hatred. Given the sheer amount of bugs and for how long bugs have been an occurrence in this game, I'd say that it is highly unprofessional on the developer's part to keep going like it's a normal thing to have a game that is constantly broken. The main point of me listing these bugs is not to, just call out Blizzard for being bad and, D4 bad and so on, all the memes. It's just the fact that myself and I assume many other people around the globe are passionate about Diablo as a game and the story of it, and we want a better product. We want Diablo to be a good game. But sadly, all these bugs just serve to show how lacking in quality the patches and updates from Blizzard really are. And here's a handy screenshot taken of a post in Reddit listing all of the bugs in Season 5 alone. It's ridiculous that they charge top dollar for a game that allows itself to have this many bugs and issues for more than a year now. They keep fixing and creating new problems. It feels like a never-ending cycle. It feels like they're on a sinking ship where whenever they plug a hole, two more pop up, and instead of them taking the ship into dry dock and examining it carefully and redesigning it wherever necessary, they just keep floating along, and whenever more holes pop up, they just build more of the ship, making it bigger but also accumulating more problems along the way. Now let's move on into another key aspect of any good ARPG, which is build variety. The build variety in D4 really needs some looking into, and that is no small feat. The core issue is not that there is no build variety, but that most builds have the same one or two legendary aspects without which they don't work. Or in the sorcerer's case, where we have the Firebolt enchantment, which is a must-have for almost all builds, which is, in my opinion, even worse than requiring a legendary aspect as a key feature. And instead of providing us with more useful enchantments, the devs have apparently decided to nerf the Firebolt in a future update. Now, in the early days of Diablo IV, I really liked the Ice Shards build, and especially the mechanics of it, where you would freeze and shatter enemies. It really felt cool, no pun intended, to zip across the map, shattering everything in your way. But then you would run into a boss, and that's where the fun ends. We need to have ways to overcome these shortcomings in different classes. Chain Lightning, for example, had a similar issue before the Axial Conduit unique was added, where it was only decent for trash mobs. Now it can actually do some decent single target DPS as well. We need more ways to do this for more skills. This again feels like a consequence of trying to have your cake and eat it too, meaning that they have designed a game that was supposed to be an ARPG and an MMO. For example, if you're playing an Ice Shard Sorcerer, you have range and are great at clearing mobs, and if you had someone like a Barbarian with you, nothing would be a problem, with the Barb dealing with bosses and the Sorcerer clearing mobs. Great idea in an MMO. Terrible idea for an ARPG, since a lot of people play solo, or some people run in groups that have only sorcerers. Build variety is always a good thing, and I don't understand why devs are always so careful that there is always only 1 or 2 builds that destroy everything, while others are just mid to bad. What is the point of having the Incinerate skill in game if it's completely useless in late game? To my knowledge, there has never been a build that uses Incinerate that was any good in late game. It's just a waste of potential and fun, in my opinion. Another class which faced similar issues throughout the lifetime of Diablo IV is the Necromancer, and specifically here I'll be talking about the Blight Necromancer, which was a very powerful build in Season 4 if I recall correctly, and I did have a lot of fun playing with it. Though not the most powerful, it was nice to play a damage over time build that could actually do, well, damage over time in a way that didn't imply expecting the enemy to stand like an idiot in a pool of mush for half an hour before finally keeling over. Then there were problems with the minion necro, which is absolutely bizarre to me. I'm not really big on playing minion builds, but I do know that a lot of people do enjoy them, and that is one of the things that makes Necromancer the Necromancer that everybody knows and loves. So it really felt bizarre to me that for many seasons there was no minion build that was viable in late game. And here I have a small suggestion, since there is no real endgame in D4, except for the repetitive stuff. How about making build variety a part of endgame, at least until something better comes along? At least then we would have a lot of new things to do, like, keep remaking and grinding gear in order to try out new skills and playstyles. And now we come to the Vessel of Hatred expansion. The story of Vessel of Hatred had me interested, and to be honest, I did enjoy it. I also appreciated the fact that we could see our characters in the cutscenes. It really felt more immersive in that way. I don't really get why Neyrelle gets so much hate, but honestly, I didn't have a problem with her. I also liked that we got to meet Akarat and learn more about who he was and is. Visually, the cutscenes were actually at the typical Blizzard levels, meaning that they were extremely well done. Mephisto's wolf aspect did look menacing and cool in those cutscenes. The voice acting was great across the board. Now, I know that some people had issues with the Spiritborn voice actress, well, at least one that I know of, but honestly, to me, her tone seemed like it perfectly fit who she was and the situation she was in. And when it comes to the class itself, well, that's a bit tricky to evaluate given the state of the class as it is right now. I mean, the class feels good, but it is also very broken and overpowered, so I don't think we have a very realistic feel for the class as of yet. Maybe in next season. Well, most likely. The class itself being broken is still not that huge of a deal for me, because again, it's a PvE game, so no harm done. I just wish that the other classes could at least compete. And the developers did say we would get a class that was never before seen in a Diablo game, and technically they were right. Practically, it's the monk from Diablo III, with some witch doctor mixed in. I mean, sure, the name is different and visually it does look slightly different, but essentially it is the monk class. Not really a problem for me, since I love playing monk in Diablo 3, but Why the build-up around the new mysterious class? I mean, I get that they want to build hype, but it just felt silly ultimately. Because what did they expect? That we were not going to figure out that it's not all that different? And the part of Vessel of Hatred that I did have a really big problem with is that we still don't have a single prime evil to fight in the game. After the storyline of the base game finishes, you would naturally expect that Mephisto will be the boss of the expansion. Spoiler alert here, and skip ahead if you don't want to know the ending of Vessel of Hatred. Instead, we fight an aspect of Mephisto, and now he has risen and walks among us. And that's it. No big fight, no culmination of events, and it just feels like Blizzard are aiming for a lot of expansions, like World of Warcraft levels of expansions. That's all well and fine, but not when you're stretching the story out in order to put out more expansions at the expense of quality. The fact that Mephisto is not the final boss, and that there isn't even an uber boss version of the fight we did get, feels like a big L to me. The fight is already in the game, and it would give us another reason to go to Nahantu. And when it comes to runes, they were honestly so much better and cooler in Diablo II. I had never played D2 until this summer when it got me hooked and I played for 2 months straight, so I can say that the rune system in Diablo 2 was so cool that it makes me very sad to see how it was implemented in Diablo 4. The runes also solved a question that was burning in my mind ever since I played Diablo 3, and that is, what are white, blue and yellow items for when all I ever equip are legendaries, uniques or set items depending on the game? Well, Diablo 2 apparently had an answer. You need a good white base for runes. Slot in 2 or more runes and you got yourself a semi-custom unique item with some godly powers. In Diablo 4, it's a logical system of if-then, meaning if a condition is met, a power will activate. It's just not really that interesting when compared to what Diablo 2 had to offer. And I hope that there is a slight chance, at least, that they will reconsider this in the future and give us a reason to chase after white items as well. And ultimately we have the coup de grace, the pièce de la résistance, the endgame content, which in D4 felt very scarce on launch day, but has been improved a lot since the early days, and it still has a long way to go. We no longer have to wait for an eternity and time our bathroom breaks according to when the next Blood Tide or Hell Tide will be happening. There are uber bosses to farm for chase items, and we no longer need to reset a dungeon in order to farm the boss, which was greatly appreciated and complained about by yours truly, so I was very happy with the changes that were made there. The changes to dungeons and the pit in Season 6 were also a very good thing in my opinion. I really hated doing dungeons for Glyph XP, it felt like such a chore. Now, when I decide to do a dungeon, I know that the more enemies I kill, the more of the site I will get, so it's a good incentive for me to clear the whole thing. Not great, but not terrible. It's also easier to farm Glyph XP in the pit, and it goes so much faster this way that it actually feels decent now. I can't say much about the Citadel as I haven't played it yet, because like I said, I only have one friend who plays D4 and he doesn't play all that much. This was a weird one for me. Blizzard know that the game is mostly being played solo, yet they decided to throw in something that requires more than one player. It's not a big deal for me as there is no power locked behind the Citadel, but I still don't get why. Couldn't they have just made it so that the difficulty and the mechanics scaled according to the number of players? For example, in Warframe, if you play with others, there are doors you can't open without at least one more player opening it with you. If, however, you are playing solo, you can open the door with no problem by yourself. It's not really a big issue, but it came off as a weird choice to me. The main problem that the endgame suffers from is that, well, besides the Helltide, the Pit, the dungeons and the Infernal Hordes, there isn't really all that much endgame to speak of. The addition of Infernal Hordes in Season 5 was a good move, but this is still just a tiny sliver of what Diablo IV should have in order to keep players interested for more than a week or two. The issue here is not just one of quantity, but of quality as well. For example, the Pit and the dungeons are variations of the same thing. The Infernal Hordes can be fun for a run or two, but are mostly a brain-dead activity. In Season 5, I got all of the mythic uniques and made at least one build for every class, and in some cases more. And then what? There is no challenge and nothing left to do except wait for the next season. All in all, the endgame is in a better state than it was, and I do hope they add more boss fights to the mix and some other cool mechanics to play around with. Some fights are already in the game, but can only be played as part of the story. I'm talking about Astaroth and Mephisto fights, of course, both of which would be great to have as part of the endgame. And these are resources that Blizzard already made, they were already in the game, so basically it just feels like they're not thinking enough about how to enrich the endgame experience. When we take everything that I have said in this video into account, they are, in my opinion, asking way too much while offering so little in terms of quality. Now, as I said, I do enjoy playing Diablo IV, and I tend to take the game as it is, so I do not personally feel that I have too many problems with playing it, but I do feel that the developers are not making an honest effort in making the game the best it can be. With the exception of Season 2, I have played every season so far and will continue to do so. The game is fun for 1 to 3 week stops, depending on how much you play, there is no doubt about that. But it could be so much more if given the proper attention by the developers. The problem is that when we compare Blizzard's games from the past to the more contemporary ones, they really don't match. In the 2000s, Blizzard was at the top of their game. Every product was highly polished and well designed. This doesn't feel like that Blizzard. And it isn't, since the people that made those games are long gone from the company now. But there is still no reason that they couldn't strive towards those standards today. So, again, my criticism goes more to the devs than the game itself. They should take more care when crafting new systems and perform better quality control when pushing out patches and expansions. If you have played Diablo IV on launch and given up, I would recommend that you give it at least one more chance, because now it is a different game than what it was in the beginning. If nothing, you'll have some fun. Considering that this is one of the main purposes of a game, I'd say it can be a decent game from time to time, but it's a game whose potential keeps being underutilized and underappreciated by the people who made it. And this is probably going to cost them dearly today, as today is December 6th, and as we know, Path of Exile 2 is launching, so I expect the player count for D4 to drop considerably, and I have also seen that the Season 7 is going to be some sort of a rehash of Seasons 1 and 2, which is not boding well for the future of Diablo IV, unfortunately. I mean, sure, the Seasons 1 and 2 were alright, especially Season 2, but at this point it's just a rehash of what we already know. I will be playing that season, but I don't expect too much from it, especially not now that Path of Exile 2 has shown its cards and we know how much good stuff we have coming over there. And I also have kind of an announcement for Path of Exile 2. This will be the first game that I'm going to be streaming here on YouTube. And why only YouTube? Well, because I still don't know enough to, set everything up correctly, and there's a ton of other work that needs to be done. So this is gonna be kind of a test drive, and if you wanna come hang out, chat casually about video games, Path of Exile, Diablo, whatever other game comes to mind, please come and join me. let's have some fun. So that's it for me, and as I am really bad at making outros, I usually tend to go with generic ones, so I'm just gonna say, if you liked the video, click like, share and subscribe. I hope you got something out of this, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!